In an imposing corporate building, a child invisible to adult eyes silently observes everything. They witness a suspicious conversation where a dangerous plan is being orchestrated behind the scenes. Unsure of whom to trust, they decide to act alone with the only weapon they possess, a secret recording. What they discover could change everyone's fate before the clock strikes 3 in the afternoon. If this story interests you, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin. On a muggy morning in Brighton, B, a 7-year-old street girl, walked along the pavements, observing the hurried movement of passing commuters. The sound of the wind rustling through the tree leaves and the smell of hot asphalt mixed with the aroma of street food stalls created a familiar yet disquieting atmosphere. She knew every corner of the streets, every noise, every piece of concrete worn by time. Her life was a constant search for small moments of relief, a piece of bread, a park bench to rest on, a kind glance which rarely appeared. Her mother, Mrs. Rita, worked as a cleaner in one of the city's most imposing buildings, the Brighton Tower. Bea was used to seeing her mother leave early in her simple work uniform and return late at night. Sometimes in the few moments they had together, Bea would watch her, trying to understand the sacrifices her mother made. But the truth was, Bea barely knew what hard work meant. For her, working was just a matter of survival, a routine that repeated endlessly. She knew her mother couldn't give her what she truly wanted, a different future. The small apartment where they lived, in the Kemptown neighborhood, was simple, with peeling walls and a window that didn't close properly. But it was what they had. Bea slept on a mattress on the living room floor, while her mother occupied the only bedroom. During the day, the girl attended the local primary school, but classes weren't regular. Teachers were absent, there were strikes, and Bea couldn't keep up with the other students. She felt different, as if she belonged to another world. That day, however, Bea went to work with her mother. It wasn't common, but school classes were cancelled due to a strike, and her mother didn't know who to leave her daughter with. Upon arriving at the building, Bea was impressed by the luxury of the place. The mirrored glass windows reflected the city in a way that seemed almost unreal. She felt a pang of envy as she looked at the surrounding buildings, the expensive cars parked at the entrance. For Bea, that world was distant, something that seemed made for other people, not for someone like her. "Mum, why don't we live in a place like this?" Bea asked, her eyes wide at the splendor of the location. Mrs. Rita smiled sadly. "One day, my dear, who knows? Now come on, and don't touch anything, okay? If Mr. Joel sees me with you here, I could lose my job." Bea nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She knew how important that job was to her mother, how hard she worked to keep it. Mr. Joel, the cleaning supervisor, was a severe man of few words, known for his strictness with rules. They entered the building through the service entrance, a stark contrast to the main entrance. While the executive entrance was all marble and glass, with a well-dressed security guard and a red carpet, the service entrance was narrow, with unpainted concrete walls and a small metal door. Two different worlds in the same building. Bea followed her mother to the service lift. As they entered, she noticed a tall, elegant man in a dark suit who smiled with a suspicious air. Bea didn't pay him much mind, but something about his posture made her feel uneasy. Her instinct, sharpened by the need to survive on the streets, warned her that something was out of place. She felt, as never before, that something was about to happen, though she didn't know exactly what. "Good morning," the man said with a foreign accent. "I'm lost. Does this lift go to the 35th floor?" "Yes, it does, sir," Mrs. Rita replied, head bowed, not looking at the man. "But you should use the passenger lift. This one is for service personnel." "No problem," the man replied, staring at Bea. "Sometimes it's good to know all the ways around a place." Bea felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something strange about that man, something she couldn't quite define. The lift ascended slowly, stopping on a few floors for other cleaning staff to enter. At each stop, Bea noticed the man carefully examining the people, as if he were looking for something or someone. They reached the 35th floor, where Bea's mother began her work shift. The floor was modern, with glass walls and a grey carpet that seemed to absorb all sound. Bea was led to the storage room, a small, dull space where she would spend the day. Her mother handed her coloring pencils and a coloring book. "Stay here, Bea. Don't leave for anything, understood? I'll come see you when I can, but I have a lot of work today. There's an important meeting, and I need to make everything impeccable." "What meeting, Mum?" "It's an important business deal for Dr. Charles. He owns all this, you know. And today he's meeting with some foreign investors. That's why the building is so busy." Bea nodded, pretending to understand the importance of it all. For her it was just another tedious day, far from the streets she knew, cooped up in a small storage room. But she was obedient and knew her mother was doing the best she could. When Mrs. Rita left, Bea tried to distract herself with her coloring book. It was an old book with some pages already filled, but it still had space for her imagination. She began coloring the image of a princess, giving her a pink dress and golden hair. She stayed there for a while, lost in thought, imagining what her life would be like if she were a princess, living in a castle with servants and riches. But soon boredom took over. The storage room was small and stuffy, without windows. The hours passed slowly, and Bea began to get restless. She decided to peek through the crack in the door just to see the movement in the corridor. It was a common practice on the street, where Bea had learned to observe others without being seen. The corridor was empty, but she could hear voices in the distance. She opened the door a little wider, just enough to poke her head out. That's when she saw the same man from the lift, now accompanied by another, equally tall and well-dressed. They spoke softly, in a language Bea couldn't fully understand, but which sounded like Russian. Curious, she moved closer, hiding behind a large vase that decorated the corridor. The men seemed agitated, constantly looking around, as if they feared being overheard. Bea managed to catch a few words in English amidst the conversation. "The meeting. Charles, 3 in the afternoon, the plan is ready." Bea didn't understand the context, but the men's tone frightened her. There was a palpable tension in the air, a seriousness that made her heart race. The instinct that helped her survive on. The streets of Brighton told her those men weren't there for a simple business meeting. She moved away from the door as silently as she could and ran back to the storage room. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. What should she do? Tell her mum? But she would never believe her. Tell a building. Security guard? Would they listen to a 7-year-old girl, the daughter of a cleaner? Bea sat on the storage room floor, hugging her knees. She tried to organize her thoughts. What were those men planning against this Charles? Why did they speak so seriously about target and consequences? She remembered something an old homeless man had once told her. "Bea, in this world, people only listen to those who have proof. Words are carried away by the wind, but proof remains." Proof. That's what she needed. She needed to prove that something strange was happening, that those men were planning something against the company owner. But how? That's when she noticed. At the back of the storage room, a shelf with cleaning equipment. Among them, there were some devices that looked like old walkie-talkies, probably used by staff to communicate between floors. She picked one up and examined it. It was a bit dusty, but it seemed functional. There was a record button. An idea sparked in her mind. What if she could record the men's conversation? It would be the proof she needed. Someone would have to believe her if she had a recording. With the walkie-talkie hidden under her blouse, Bea left the storage room again. This time she had a clear purpose. She needed to find the men again and record what they were saying. It was risky, but she was used to risks. Life on the streets of Brighton had taught her to be brave. The corridor was busier now. Employees came and went, carrying documents, talking about meetings and deadlines. Bea blended in with them, trying to appear invisible, a skill she had perfected on the streets. After a few minutes of searching, she found the 3 men again. They were in another smaller room, with the door completely closed this time. Bea looked around, searching for a way to hear what they were saying. She noticed an air conditioning vent near the floor next to the room. She crouched down and put her ear near the grate. To her surprise, she could hear the conversation perfectly. "The plan is simple," said a voice Bea recognized as belonging to the older man. "The device will be activated remotely when Charles sits in the chair. It cannot fail." "And what about building security?" asked another voice. We've already taken care of that. The cameras on the 35th floor will be off for maintenance during the meeting. We have someone in security. And afterwards, how will we get out? Through the emergency staircase. Everything will be ready. A car awaits us in the car park. B switched on the walkie-talkie's record button, praying it was working. The voices continued, discussing details of the plan, mentioning times, positions, the name Charles repeatedly. Suddenly, she heard footsteps approaching from the other end of the corridor. It was her mum, with the cleaning trolley. If she saw her there, crouched near the air vent, she would certainly take her back to the storage room and forbid her from leaving again. B quickly stood up and ran in the opposite direction, hiding behind a large ornamental plant. Mrs. Rita passed by, without noticing her daughter, entering a room to clean it. With her heart racing, B waited a few minutes before approaching the air vent again. The conversation continued, so it's settled. At 3 p.m. sharp when the meeting begins. Don't fail, Vladimir. I won't fail, sir. The conversation seemed to be coming to an end. B switched off the walkie-talkie and quickly moved away. She had a recording now, proof. But what to do with it? Who would believe her? She returned to the storage room, closed the door behind her, and sat on the floor thinking. She listened to the recording. It was a bit muffled, but most of the conversation was understandable. It was enough to prove that something serious was being planned against this Charles, the company owner. She thought about showing it to her mum, but knew she would be furious that B had left the storage room. Besides, Mrs. Rita probably wouldn't understand the gravity of the situation, or worse, might think B was making up stories again. No, she needed someone who could do something immediately. Someone who had access to Charles, who could warn him of the danger. She remembered Fern, the marketing assistant she had met earlier. She seemed nice, and as an office employee, perhaps she could help. But would she believe a 7-year-old girl, the cleaner's daughter? Time was passing. She looked at the clock on the storage room wall. It was already 2 p.m. The meeting, according to what she'd heard, would start at 3 p.m. She only had an hour to do something. Gathering all her courage, B grabbed the walkie-talkie and left the storage room again. This time she went straight to the secretary's area looking for Fern. She found her typing rapidly on her computer. "Hi, Fern," B said nervously. Fern looked up, surprised. "Hi, B, is everything all right? I thought you'd gone back to the storage room." "I did, but I need to show you something." B's serious expression made Fern stop what she was doing. "What is it, dear? Has something happened?" "I overheard a conversation. Some strange men. They're planning something against Dr. Charles." Fern frowned. "What are you talking about, B?" "I recorded it, look." B showed her the walkie-talkie. "They said that at 3 o'clock when Dr. Charles sits in the chair, something is going to happen." Fern looked confused, but something in B's expression made her take the girl seriously. "Let me hear it." B started the playback. The recording was muffled, but the keywords were audible. Device, Charles, chair, 3 p.m., plan. Fern's face paled as she listened. When the recording finished, she looked at B with an expression that mixed surprise and concern. "Where did you record this, B?" "Near the room where they were talking. They spoke with a foreign accent, I think Russian." Fern was silent for a moment, thinking. "You know this is serious, don't you?" "If it's true." "It is true," B insisted. "I heard it. They're going to do something to Dr. Charles during the meeting." "At 3 o'clock?" Fern looked at the clock on her computer. 2:15 p.m. "Who are these men, B?" "Did you see them?" "I did. There are 3 of them. An older one, who seems to be the boss, and 2 younger ones, all in dark suits. One of them is called Vladimir." Upon hearing the name, Fern seemed to recognize it. "Vladimir? Vladimir Petrov? He's here today for the meeting with Dr. Charles. He represents a group of Russian investors." B nodded, excited that Fern knew who he was. "Yes, it could be him. They talked about a device and about the security cameras being turned off during the meeting." Fern stood up from her chair, resolute. "Come with me, B. We need to talk to building security and Dr. Charles's secretary. You believe me? I don't know if I completely believe it, but I can't ignore it. If there's any chance it's true." B followed Fern through the corridors of the 35th floor, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Someone was finally taking her seriously, But what would happen now? Would they be able to stop whatever those men were planning? They arrived at the main reception, where an elegant, middle-aged woman was answering phone calls behind a dark wooden desk. The nameplate on her desk read, Helen Sanders, Executive Secretary. "Helen," Fern called in a hurry. "I need to speak to you." "It's urgent." Helen looked up, visibly annoyed by the interruption. Her gaze passed from Fern to Bee, and her expression hardened further. "What is a child doing here, Fern? You know it's not allowed to bring children to the office." "Helen, listen." "This is important," Fern insisted, placing her hand on Bee's shoulder. "This is Bee, Mrs. Rita's daughter from cleaning. She overheard something very worrying about the 3 p.m. meeting with Dr. Charles." Helen raised an eyebrow, skeptical. The cleaner's daughter? And what could she have possibly overheard that's so important? Bee felt her face burn with shame and anger. She hated when people treated her as if she didn't exist, as if she couldn't understand what was happening around her. On the streets of Brighton, she had learned that being small and invisible was sometimes an advantage. But at that moment she wanted to be heard, to be taken seriously. "I heard the Russian men talking," Bee said, stepping forward. "They're going to do something to Dr. Charles during the meeting. I recorded their conversation." Helen stared at Bee for a long moment, then turned her gaze back to Fern. "Are you really listening to an imaginative child? We have the most important meeting of the year in less than an hour, and you're here with conspiracy theories?" Fern sighed but stood firm. "Helen, just listen to the recording, please. If it's nothing, we won't lose more than 2 minutes. But if it's true—" Reluctantly, Helen gestured for Bee to approach. The girl handed over the walkie-talkie and pressed the play button. The same muffled voices, the same alarming words. Helen listened in silence, her expression subtly changing as the recording played. When it finished, she remained silent for a few seconds, thoughtful. "This could be anything," she finally said. "It could be a conversation taken out of context, it could be a joke, it could be a real threat," Fern completed. "Helen, do you know Vladimir Petrov? One of the men on the recording is called Vladimir." Helen's expression changed. "Vladimir Petrov is the representative of the Russian consortium that is interested in buying part of the company's shares. He arrived yesterday with his team for today's meeting. So you see, this is real. They're planning something for the 3 p.m. meeting." Helen looked at the clock. 2:25 p.m. "Even if this is true, what do you suggest we do? Cancel the most important meeting of the year because of a muffled recording made by a child?" Bee felt frustration grow. Why were adults so stubborn? Why couldn't they just believe her? "You don't need to cancel the meeting," Bee said, surprising both women. "You just need to check the room first." They talked about a device in Dr. Charles's chair. Helen and Fern exchanged glances. "The girl is right," said Fern. "We can at least check the meeting room. If we find nothing, no one needs to know. But if we do—" Helen sighed deeply. "All right, let's take a look. But quickly. Dr. Charles will arrive in half an hour, and everything needs to be perfect for the meeting." The three headed to the main meeting room, a spacious area in the corner of the 35th floor, with a dark wooden oval table and leather chairs. One of the walls was entirely made of glass, offering a panoramic view of Brighton. The river snaked in the distance, reflecting the afternoon sunlight. "Is this the room where the meeting will be held?" Bee asked, looking around, impressed by the luxury. "Yes," Helen replied, walking to the head of the table. "Dr. Charles will sit here. Vladimir and his team will be on the right, and our executives on the left." Bee approached the chair at the head. It was large black leather with armrests and wheels. "They talked about a device in the chair," she said. "Something that would be activated when Dr. Charles sat down." Helen examined the chair superficially. "I don't see anything abnormal." "We need to look closer," Fern insisted, kneeling to examine the underside of the chair. Bee, with her small fingers and keen eyes, noticed something strange under the seat. A small black object no bigger than a matchbox was discreetly glued there. "Look at this," she said, pointing. Fern leaned in for a closer look. "What is this?" "I don't know, but it doesn't look like part of the chair," Bee replied. Helen approached, now genuinely concerned. "This wasn't here before. I'm sure. I know every inch of this room." "Should we call security?" Fern asked. Helen hesitated. "If we call security and this is nothing, we'll create an unnecessary commotion. But if it's something dangerous, I think I know who can help us, Bee suddenly said. Mr. Joshua from maintenance. My mum always says he knows a bit about everything. Maybe he'll know what this is. Helen considered the suggestion for a moment. Not a bad idea. Joshua is discreet and reliable. Fern, can you go get him? Tell him we urgently need him in the meeting room, but don't mention the reason. Fern nodded and quickly left. Helen stayed in the room with Bee, both vigilant. Did you really hear them talking about activating this during the meeting? Helen asked, her voice softer now, without the condescending tone from before. Yes, Bee replied. They said it would be activated remotely when Dr. Charles sat in the chair. And why were you spying on these people? Shouldn't you have been in the storage room? Bee lowered her eyes. I was bored, and I heard strange voices in the corridor. They spoke in Russian, but some words were in English. I thought it was strange. You did well to record the conversation, Helen admitted, although spying on other people's conversations isn't a good habit. Bee smiled, happy to finally be taken seriously. But her joy was short-lived. The meeting room door opened, and to her horror one of the men she had seen entered. It was the older one, who seemed to be the boss. Excuse me, he said upon seeing Helen and Bee. I didn't know the room was occupied. Helen quickly composed herself. Mr. Petrov, what a surprise. The meeting won't start until 3 p.m. Yes, I know, he replied, looking curiously at Bee. I just wanted to check if everything was ready. And who is this charming young lady? Bee felt her blood run cold. It was him, one of the men she'd overheard planning something against Dr. Charles, and now she was face to face with him. Helen, noticing Bee's discomfort, placed herself between the girl and the man. This is Bee, the daughter of one of our employees. She's here today because school was off. We were just leaving. Vladimir Petrov smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I understand. Well, I don't want to interrupt. I'll come back later. He left the room, closing the door behind him. Helen let out a sigh of relief. Is he one of them? She asked Bee. Yes, the girl replied, still trembling. He's the boss, the one who seems to be in charge of the others. This complicates things, Helen murmured. If he saw us here, he'll suspect we've discovered something. At that moment, Fern returned with Mr. Joshua, a middle-aged black man, with graying hair and hands calloused from work. He was carrying a toolbox. What's happened, Mrs. Helen? He asked, concerned. Fern said it was urgent. Helen pointed to the device under the chair. Joshua, do you know what this is? It doesn't look like part of the chair. Joshua bent down to examine the object. His face became serious. That's not part of the chair for sure. It looks like some kind of... He hesitated, looking at Bee. Some kind of electronic device. I don't know exactly what it's for, but it shouldn't be here. Could it be dangerous? Fern asked. I can't say, Joshua replied, scratching his head. But if it was placed without authorization, it can't be good. Can we remove it? Helen asked. Joshua hesitated. I don't know if we should touch it. It could be delicate. I think we should call security. Mr. Petrov just came in here, Helen said. One of the men Bee heard planning this. If we call security now, he might get suspicious. What do you suggest then? Fern asked. Helen thought for a moment. We have to change the chair. Joshua, can you bring another chair exactly like this one? We have several identical ones in the storage room on the 33rd floor, Joshua replied. I can bring one without a problem. Great, bring it discreetly. We don't want to draw attention. Meanwhile, Fern, call the head of security. Don't mention details, just say we need him here urgently, discreetly. Joshua quickly left towards the lift while Fern picked up the phone to call security. Helen remained in the room with Bee, both vigilant. You were very brave, Bee, Helen said with new respect in her voice. Many adults would have ignored what they heard, or would have been too afraid to get involved. On the street you learn to trust your instinct, Bee replied simply. If you feel something is wrong, it probably is. Helen smiled, impressed by the child's wisdom. Your mum must be proud of you. She doesn't know anything about this, Bee said, suddenly worried. She'll be angry when she finds out I left the storage room. Don't worry about that now. I'm sure she'll understand when she knows what you did. 15 minutes later, Joshua returned with a chair identical to the one in the room. Carefully, he and Fern swapped the chairs, leaving the one with the strange device leaning against the wall. The head of security, a tall, strong man named Mark, arrived shortly after. Helen quickly explained the situation, showing him Bee's recording and the device found under the chair. This is very serious, Mark said, after examining the object. It looks like an advanced listening device, but it could be more than that. We need to evacuate the room and call a specialized team. We don't have time, Helen said, looking at the clock. 2:40 p.m. The meeting starts in 20 minutes and Dr. Charles should arrive any moment. What do you suggest then? Mark asked. We can continue with the meeting, but in the room on the 36th floor, Helen suggested. It's identical to this one. No one will notice the difference. Meanwhile, you can discreetly investigate this device. And what about the Russians? Fern asked. If they don't see their plan working, won't they suspect something? Precisely why we should change rooms without them noticing, Helen replied. We'll say there was a last-minute problem with the air conditioning in this room. It's a plausible reason, and no one will question it. Mark agreed with the plan. I'll place some of my men in strategic positions discreetly, and I'll have this device analyzed immediately. While they discussed the details, the reception phone rang. Helen answered. Yes? Understood. We'll be ready. She hung up and looked at the others. That was the ground floor reception. Dr. Charles just arrived. We have less than 5 minutes before he comes up. And what about the Russians? Fern asked. They're already in the building on the 30th floor in the waiting room, Helen replied. So they'll be called to the meeting promptly at 3 p.m. Mark took the lead. We have to act fast. Helen, go greet Dr. Charles and take him directly to the room on the 36th floor. Fern, you stay here and direct anyone who shows up to the new room. Say there was a problem with the air conditioning. Joshua, take the chair with the device to a safe location so we can examine it better. I'll position my men and contact authorities who can help us. And me? Bea asked, suddenly feeling excluded. Helen smiled at her. You, my young lady, come with me. I want Dr. Charles to meet the person who possibly saved the meeting today. Bea felt a mix of pride and nervousness. To meet the company owner, the most important man in the building, it was something she never imagined would happen. The adults dispersed to carry out their tasks. Helen held Bea's hand and guided her to the lift. They went down to the ground floor to meet Charles Maxwell, the president and founder of Maxwell Enterprises. The building's lobby was imposing, with high ceilings, marble flooring, and a decorative fountain in the center. Bea had never been there, as she always entered through the service door with her mother. She was amazed by the grandeur of the place. Well-dressed people moved back and forth, some talking on their phones, others carrying folders and laptops. No one seemed to notice Bea's presence, a simple girl in worn clothes amidst that sophisticated environment. Or rather, almost no one. What is this child doing here? Asked a severe male voice. Bea and Helen turned. It was Mr. Joel, the cleaning supervisor, a thin man with a perpetually stern expression. He looked at Bea with disapproval. Where is your mum, girl? Does she know you're wandering around the building? Before Bea could answer, Helen intervened. It's all right, Mr. Joel, Bea is with me. Company matters. Mr. Joel seemed surprised by Helen's response but didn't question it. He walked away, still looking suspiciously at the girl. Don't worry about him, Helen told Bea. Mr. Joel is very strict with rules, but deep down he's a good man. At that moment, the revolving doors of the main entrance opened, and Charles Maxwell entered. He was a man of medium height, around 50, with graying hair and an impeccably tailored suit. He walked with quiet confidence, greeting employees he met along the way. Helen straightened her posture and adjusted her blazer. Come on, Bea, it's time for you to meet Dr. Charles. They walked up to him. Charles smiled upon seeing Helen. Helen, how are you? Is everything ready for the meeting with the Russians? Yes, Dr. Charles, everything is on track. But there was a small last-minute change. The meeting will be in the room on the 36th floor, not the 35th. An air conditioning problem. Charles nodded without questioning. His gaze then fell upon Bea. And who is this young lady? This is Bea, Mrs. Rita's daughter from cleaning, Helen introduced. And she has a very interesting story to tell you on the way to the room. As they ascended in Charles's private lift, Helen briefly narrated what had happened, how Bea had overheard the Russians' conversation, how she had recorded the audio, how she had insisted on being heard, and how, thanks to her, they had discovered the device under the chair. Charles listened attentively, his face moving from surprise to concern, and finally to gratitude. When Helen finished, he crouched down to Bea's height. Bea, you were very brave and perceptive. Few adults would have noticed what you did, and even fewer would have had the courage to do something about it. I am very grateful to you. B felt her face flush with embarrassment and pride. It was nothing, Dr. Charles. I just did what I thought was right. That's exactly what makes a difference in this world, B. Doing what's right, even when no one is looking, for even when it's difficult. Charles smiled and extended his hand to her. I am honored to meet you, B. B shook his hand, feeling important for the first time in her life. She was no longer just the cleaner's daughter, the girl who wandered the streets of Brighton. She was someone who had made a difference. The lift arrived at the 36th floor, and they went straight to the meeting room. It was almost identical to the one downstairs, with the same oval table, the same chairs, the same panoramic view. Mark, the head of security, was already there, along with two other discreetly positioned security guards. Any news on the device? Helen asked Mark. It's still being analyzed, he replied. But I can tell you, it's not just a listening device. It seems to have more complex components. Charles absorbed the information seriously. This is more serious than it looks. We need to be prepared for anything. Everything is under control, Dr. Charles, Mark assured him. My men are strategically positioned, and we are monitoring the Russians closely. Excellent. We'll proceed with the meeting as planned then. We can't give any signs that we've discovered something. B observed everything with fascination. It was like being inside a spy movie, one of those she sometimes saw through the windows of appliance stores. But this was real. It was happening right there in front of her, and she was part of it. The room phone rang. Helen answered. Yes, you can send them up. She hung up and looked at Charles. The Russians are coming up. They'll be here in 2 minutes. Charles nodded. Well, let's receive them with all courtesy then. Turning to B, he said, Would you like to stay to see how everything ends? I promise you'll be safe. B hesitated. On one hand, she was curious to see the outcome of the situation. So on the other, she was starting to worry about her mum. Mrs. Rita must already be looking for her in the storage room. I think I need to go back to the storage room, she finally said. My mum must be worried. I understand, Charles replied. Helen, can you arrange for someone to accompany B back and explain the situation to her mum? Of course, Dr. Charles, Helen said, signaling to one of the security guards. Roger, please accompany B to the 35th floor and find Mrs. Rita. Briefly explain to her what happened, and say that Dr. Charles would like to speak with her after the meeting. The security guard, a young man with an athletic build, nodded. Yes, madam. Before leaving, B turned to Charles. Good luck with the meeting, Dr. Charles. Charles smiled. Fortune favors the prepared, B, and thanks to you we are well prepared. B left the room with Roger, feeling lighter and in a way older. In a matter of hours, she had faced challenges, been heard by adults and even praised by the most important man in the building. It was more than her young life had provided her until then. In the lift, Roger looked at her with admiration. The people downstairs in security are talking about you. The girl who uncovered the conspiracy. You're a hero, B blushed. I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone would do. No, B, not everyone would have had the courage and perceptiveness you did. Most people would have ignored what they heard, or would have been too afraid to do something about it. When the lift doors opened on the 35th floor, B saw her mum in the corridor, her face contorted with worry. Looking frantically in all directions. Mum, B called, running towards her. Mrs. Rita turned, relief flooding her face upon seeing her daughter. Where have you been? I've been looking for you for hours. Before B could explain, Roger stepped forward. Mrs. Rita? I'm Roger from security. Your daughter has been with Dr. Charles Maxwell for the past few minutes. What? Mrs. Rita looked confused and scared. What has my daughter done? Is she in trouble? Quite the opposite, Roger replied, smiling. Your daughter possibly prevented a serious incident today. Dr. Charles would like to speak with you after the 3 p.m. meeting. He asked you to wait in his office. I don't understand, Mrs. Rita said, looking from Roger to B. What's going on? Mum, I found out some men were planning something against Dr. Charles, B explained, excited. I recorded their conversation and showed it to Mrs. Helen and Fern. And they believed me. And we found a strange thing under Dr. Charles's chair. Mrs. Rita looked completely lost. B, what are you talking about? What men? What recording? Roger intervened. Mrs. Rita, I know it sounds confusing, but your daughter truly did something extraordinary today. Dr. Charles will explain everything personally. For now, he asked you both to wait in his office. It's a safe place and there's coffee and soft drinks there. Still confused, but with no option, Mrs. Rita allowed Roger to guide them to Charles Maxwell's office. It was a spacious room, with floor-to-ceiling windows, elegant furniture, and a breathtaking view of Brighton. Bea had never been in such a luxurious place. "Make yourselves comfortable," Roger said. "Dr. Charles will be here as soon as the meeting finishes." When they were alone, Mrs. Rita sat in one of the armchairs and looked sternly at her daughter. "Now explain properly what happened, Bea, and I don't want any more fantasy stories, understood?" Bea sighed. Her mother never believed her, always thought she was making up stories. But this time she had proof. She took out the walkie-talkie she was still carrying and pressed the play button. As the recording played, Mrs. Rita's face changed. Initial disbelief gave way to surprise and then to fear. "My goodness, Bea, you recorded this? And you heard these men talking about doing something to Dr. Charles during the meeting," Bea completed. "They put something under his chair, something that would be activated when he sat down. And you told Mrs. Helen, Dr. Charles's secretary?" "Yes, but first I told Fern from marketing. She helped me talk to Mrs. Helen. And then we checked the meeting room and found a strange device under the chair. Exactly as the men had said." Mrs. Rita covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide. "My daughter, do you have any idea what you've done? You might have..." She seemed unable to complete the sentence. "Save Dr. Charles?" Bea suggested with a small smile. "Yes," Mrs. Rita replied, finally letting it sink in. "You might have saved Dr. Charles. My goodness, Bea, this is incredible," Bea completed hopefully. "Dangerous," Mrs. Rita exclaimed. "You could have gotten hurt. What if those men had seen you spying on them? What if they did something to you?" Bea hadn't thought of that. In her childish mind, she had only seen the adventure, the mystery to be solved. She hadn't considered the risks. "Sorry, Mum, I just wanted to help." Mrs. Rita took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "I know, my dear, I know. But promise me you'll never get involved in dangerous situations like this again, okay?" Bea nodded, though in her heart she knew that if confronted with the same situation again, she would probably do exactly the same thing. It was her nature, to observe, to act, to help. She couldn't just stand by when she saw something wrong happening. While they waited, Bea thought about the Russian men. What did they want with Dr. Charles? Why did they put that device in the chair? And what would happen now that their plan had been discovered? On the 36th floor, the meeting between Charles Maxwell and the Russian investors was about to begin. The meeting room had been meticulously prepared. Organized documents, water and coffee available, presentations loaded onto the system. Everything seemed normal, except for the fact that nothing was normal that afternoon. Charles Maxwell, seated at the head of the table, maintained a serene expression, but his mind was working at 1,000 miles an hour. He had been informed about the device found in the chair of the original room and was now alert for any sign of suspicious behavior. Helen, positioned to his right, had a tablet in front of her, where she received discreet updates from the security team. Mark had strategically positioned men around the floor, all dressed as ordinary employees so as not to arouse suspicion. At 3 p.m. sharp, the room door opened and Vladimir Petrov entered, followed by 2 other men. All wore dark suits and carried leather briefcases. "Dr. Maxwell, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," Vladimir said, extending his hand. Charles stood up and shook his hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Petrov. Welcome to Maxwell Enterprises." The Russians took their seats at the table to Charles's right, as per protocol. Vladimir sat directly opposite Charles, while his assistant sat beside him. "I must admit I was surprised by the last-minute change of room," Vladimir commented casually as he opened his briefcase. "Any problem with the original room?" Charles smiled, maintaining his composure. "Just a minor inconvenience with the air conditioning. Nothing to worry about. This room is identical to the other, with the same magnificent view of Brighton." Vladimir nodded, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for something. "Indeed, the view is splendid. Brighton is a charming city." The meeting began with the usual formalities, presentations, company overview, financial results. Charles conducted the presentation with the skill of a man who had built an empire from scratch. The British executives complimented with specific data and projections from their areas. Russians listened attentively, asking occasional questions, taking notes. Vladimir, in particular, seemed especially interested in Maxwell Enterprises' international expansion projects. While the meeting proceeded, in Charles's office on the 35th floor, Bea and her mother waited anxiously. Mrs. Rita was still trying to process everything that had happened. Her daughter, who had always been imaginative and observant, had truly discovered something serious, something that could have grave consequences. "Mum, do you think that thing under the chair was a bomb?" Bea asked, sitting on the leather sofa, swinging her legs that barely reached the floor. "Shh, Bea. Don't say such things," Mrs. Rita reprimanded, looking around, as if fearing someone might overhear. "I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, thank goodness you discovered it. Do you think Dr. Charles will give us a reward? Like in the movies?" Mrs. Rita smiled at her daughter's innocence. "I don't know, Bea, but we didn't do this for a reward, did we? We did it because it was the right thing to do." Bea nodded, though secretly she still hoped for some kind of reward. Not necessarily money, but perhaps an opportunity, a chance to study at a better school, to have a future different from what seemed destined for her. The office phone rang, startling both of them. Mrs. Rita looked at the device, uncertain what to do. "Answer it." "Mum?" Bea encouraged. Hesitantly, Mrs. Rita picked up the phone. "Hello? Mrs. Rita? This is Helen, Dr. Charles's secretary. I just wanted to inform you that the meeting is still ongoing. Dr. Charles asked you both to continue waiting. We should finish in approximately an hour." "All right, Mrs. Helen, we'll wait." When she hung up, Bea looked at her mum, curious. "What did she say?" "That the meeting will still take a while. We have to wait," Bea sighed, impatient. The initial adrenaline had given way to growing anxiety. What would happen next? Would the Russian men be arrested? And what if they found out she was the one who reported them? Back in the meeting room on the 36th floor, the presentation reached its crucial phase, the partnership proposal between Maxwell Enterprises and the Russian consortium. "As you can see from the numbers, the synergy between our companies is evident," Charles explained, pointing to a graph on the screen. "Our knowledge of the British market, combined with your expertise in the European market, would create a formidable force on the global stage." Vladimir Petrov nodded, seemingly impressed. "Your numbers are convincing, Dr. Maxwell, but I have some concerns about the proposed governance structure. In our view, we would need a more significant participation on the board." Charles smiled diplomatically. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Petrov, and we are open to discussing adjustments to the governance structure. But the essence of our proposal is a balanced partnership where both parties have an equal voice in strategic decisions." One of Vladimir's assistants, a man with harsh features and a penetrating gaze, said something in Russian to his boss. Vladimir replied briefly and then turned his attention back to Charles. "Dr. Maxwell, let's be direct. What really interests us is your proprietary technology for deep-sea oil exploration. That's what we want to invest in." Charles maintained a neutral expression, but internally he was alert. The technology mentioned by Vladimir was one of the company's most closely guarded secrets, developed after years of research and millions in investments. It was not on the negotiation table. "Mr. Petrov, this technology is not part of the current proposal. It is a strategic asset of Maxwell Enterprises, and at the moment we are not considering sharing it, even with partners." Vladimir's expression subtly hardened. "I understand. But without access to this technology, I don't see much value in the proposed partnership. Perhaps we should reconsider the terms." Charles realized that the Russians' true intention was finally coming to light. It wasn't about a genuine partnership. They wanted the technology and were willing to use questionable tactics to obtain it. "We can certainly discuss new terms," Charles replied, maintaining his composure. "But I want to make it clear that our deep-sea technology is not for sale at any price." Vladimir exchanged glances with his assistants. There was a palpable tension in the air. "It's a shame, Dr. Maxwell. We truly believed we could reach a mutually beneficial agreement." At that moment, Helen's tablet vibrated. She discreetly looked at the message. "Preliminary analysis. Device contains listening and possibly data transmission components. Suspected to copy information from nearby computers. Authorities notified." Helen slid the tablet so Charles could see the message. He read it quickly without changing his expression, and then returned the tablet to Helen. "Mr. Petrov," Charles said, his voice now firmer, "I believe we can find a middle ground that satisfies both parties, but I need to be transparent. Our deep-sea technology is the result of decades of British research. It is not just an asset. It is part of our national legacy." Vladimir opened his mouth to reply but was interrupted by a knock on the door. Mark, the head of security, entered, accompanied by 2 plainclothes police officers. "Excuse the interruption, Dr. Charles. Could I speak with you for a moment?" "It's urgent," Charles nodded, standing up. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I'll be back in an instant." Outside the room, Mark spoke in a low voice. "The device has been analyzed. It's sophisticated industrial espionage equipment, capable of copying data from electronic devices within a 10-meter radius. The police want to interrogate the Russians immediately." Charles took a deep breath, processing the information. "I understand. Let's do this as discreetly as possible. I don't want an international scandal in tomorrow's headlines." Returning to the room, Charles maintained a calm expression. "Gentlemen, it seems we have a situation that requires our immediate attention. The police would like to ask some questions." Vladimir's expression instantly changed from confidence to apprehension. "Police, what is this about?" One of the police officers stepped forward. "Mr. Petrov, we have been informed about an espionage device found in the original meeting room, strategically placed under the chair where Dr. Maxwell would sit. Would you know anything about this?" Vladimir's face paled. He looked at his assistants, who seemed equally disturbed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "What kind of accusation is this?" "We're not making accusations yet, Mr. Petrov," the police officer replied. "Just investigating. But we would like you and your associates to accompany us to provide clarification." The Russians exchanged glances, visibly nervous. One of Vladimir's assistants said something in Russian, which sounded like an urgent question. Vladimir replied briefly, in a tone that suggested they remain calm. "This is absurd," Vladimir protested, turning to Charles. "We are representatives of a respectable consortium. We came here to discuss business, not to be treated as criminals." Charles remained impassive. "If there's nothing to hide, Mr. Petrov, I'm sure everything will be clarified quickly. Your cooperation would be appreciated." Having no alternative, Vladimir and his assistants accompanied the police officers under the watchful eyes of everyone in the room. When they left, Charles exchanged a significant look with Helen and Mark. "I think our meeting is adjourned for today," he said. "Helen, please contact our legal department immediately. Mark, I want a full report on the device and any other evidence, and where is the girl who discovered all this?" "In your office, sir, with her mother," Helen replied. Charles nodded. "Excellent. I'll speak with them right away." In Charles's office, Bea and Mrs. Rita waited, growing increasingly anxious. They had been there for almost an hour, and still hadn't received any updates. "Do you think they forgot about us?" Bea asked, lying on the sofa, drawing in a notepad she had found on the desk. "Of course not, dear. Dr. Charles must be busy with the meeting. He's a very important man, you know." At that moment, the office door opened, and Charles Maxwell entered, followed by Helen. Mrs. Rita stood up immediately, smoothing her uniform nervously. "Dr. Charles, it's an honor." Charles smiled, approaching. "The honor is all mine, Mrs. Rita. Your daughter did something extraordinary today." Turning to Bea, who was now standing beside her mother, Charles crouched down to her height. "Bea, you saved not just a meeting today. You saved confidential information of our company, which could have been stolen and used against us. And, more importantly, you showed courage and integrity that many adults lack." Bea smiled, proud. "I just did what I thought was right, Dr. Charles. And that's exactly what makes a difference in the world. People who do what's right, even when it's difficult, even when no one is looking." Charles stood up, now addressing Mrs. Rita. "Your daughter has incredible potential, Mrs. Rita. A keen eye, a sense of justice, a sharp intelligence, qualities that cannot be wasted." Mrs. Rita nodded, her eyes welling up. "Thank you, Dr. Charles. I always knew my Bea was special, but sometimes life is so hard that we end up not valuing what truly matters." "I understand perfectly," Charles replied, "and that's why I want to make a proposal. Maxwell Enterprises has a scholarship program for young talents. Normally it's for teenagers, but I'm willing to make an exception for Bea. We would like to offer her a full scholarship to one of the best schools in Brighton, with all expenses paid until the end of secondary school. And if she maintains good performance, we also guarantee a university scholarship. Mrs. Rita brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with surprise. Dr. Charles, this is too much. I don't even know how to thank you. No need to thank me, Mrs. Rita. Consider this an investment in the future. Bee's future, and also the future of our company. Talents like hers are rare and should be nurtured. Bee could hardly believe what she was hearing. A scholarship? In a real school? Not the one where teachers were absent and classes were constantly interrupted. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. And that's not all, Charles continued. I also want to offer you, Mrs. Rita, a promotion. Helen told me you are one of the most dedicated employees on the cleaning team. We would like to transfer you to executive reception. The salary is better, the hours are more regular, and you'll have more time to follow Bee's studies. Mrs. Rita started to cry, unable to contain her emotion. Dr. Charles, this would change our lives. I don't even know what to say. Charles smiled, touched. Just say yes, Mrs. Rita. The rest we will solve together. Yes, Bee exclaimed, jumping with joy. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Everyone laughed at the girl's enthusiasm. Helen, who had been silently observing the scene until then, approached. Bee, we have another surprise for you. Maxwell Enterprises is starting a mentoring program for young people, and we would like you to be our first participant. You would spend a few hours a week learning about different areas of the company, meeting professionals, understanding how the corporate world works. Bee's eyes sparkled. Like a job? Helen smiled. Not exactly a job, more like an apprenticeship, something that would complement your studies and open doors for the future. And I could choose which area I want to learn about. Bee asked, already thinking about the possibilities. Of course, Helen replied. In fact, we have an area I think you'd really like to get to know, the Corporate Security Department. Mark was very impressed with your observation and deduction skills. Bee was almost bursting with happiness. It was as if in a single day, all the doors that had always been closed to her suddenly opened. When can I start? Charles laughed at the girl's enthusiasm. Soon, Bee. First, we'll take care of your transfer to the new school. Helen will help your mum with all the necessary paperwork. Meanwhile, Mark is already eager to show you how the building's security system works. At that moment, the office phone rang. Helen answered, listened briefly, and then addressed Charles. Dr. Charles, it's the police. They would like to speak with you about the Russians. Charles nodded. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Turning back to Bee and Mrs. Rita, he smiled. It seems I have some matters to resolve. But don't worry. Helen will take care of everything from now on. She has all the details of the scholarship program and your new position, Mrs. Rita. Thank you, Dr. Charles, Mrs. Rita said, still emotional. You are changing our lives. You deserve it, Mrs. Rita, and in fact I am the one who should thank you. If it weren't for Bee, we could have lost years of research and development. What she did today is invaluable to Maxwell Enterprises. With a final nod, Charles left the office, leaving Bee and Mrs. Rita in Helen's care. Meanwhile, at the police department, Vladimir Petrov and his assistants were being interrogated separately. The device found under the chair had been confirmed as advanced industrial espionage equipment, capable of copying data from nearby computers and phones. It was a clear violation of British and international laws. Vladimir, confronted with the evidence, desperately tried to deny involvement, claiming he didn't know the device existed, that perhaps a member of his team had acted on their own. But the investigators were not convinced. The recording made by Bee, though muffled, contained enough evidence to incriminate him. At the end of the day, Vladimir and his assistants were formally accused of industrial espionage and attempted theft of intellectual property. The case quickly gained repercussion in business circles, but as per Charles's wish, it was handled with discretion by the media. For Bee and Mrs. Rita, that day marked the beginning of a new life. They left the Brighton Tower no longer as the cleaner and her daughter, but as the new executive receptionist and the first participant in Maxwell Enterprises' mentoring and scholarship program. As they walked to the bus stop, Mrs. Rita held her daughter's hand firmly. Do you understand what happened today, Bee? How everything changed? Bee nodded, still processing the day's events. I think so, Mum. Everything will be different now, won't it? Yes, my dear. Everything will be different. You'll study at a good school. I'll have a better job. We'll be able to move to a better place, maybe even buy a house one day. And I'll be able to learn about security with Mr. Mark," Bea exclaimed, excited. "He said I have natural talent." Mrs. Rita smiled, squeezing her daughter's hand. "You always had a special eye for things, Bea. You always saw what others didn't. I'm just sorry I didn't always believe you." "It's okay, Mum, I understand. Sometimes I do make up stories. But not this time," Mrs. Rita said seriously. "This time you saw something real, something important, and you had the courage to act. I'm very proud of you, my dear." Bea smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest she had never felt before. Her mother's pride, the recognition from important people like Dr. Charles, the promise of a better future. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. As the bus approached, Bea looked back at the imposing Brighton Tower, its glass windows reflecting the Brighton sunset. That building, which was once just her mother's workplace, now represented the gateway to a new world. A world of possibilities, of opportunities, of dreams that could become reality. "Come on, Bea," Mrs. Rita called as the bus stopped. "This is ours." Bea got on the bus, sitting by the window. As the vehicle moved away from the city centre towards the Kemp Town neighbourhood, she observed the streets of Brighton with new eyes. They were no longer just the streets where she aimlessly wandered. They were the streets of a city full of stories, of secrets, of adventures waiting to be discovered. And she, Bea, a girl of just 7 years old, the daughter of a cleaner, had proven that she could make a difference in this world. That she could see what others didn't, that she could act when others hesitated, that she could change the course of events with her courage and perceptiveness. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but one thing she was sure of: she would never again be just the cleaner's daughter. From that day on, she was Bea, the girl who had prevented industrial espionage, who had saved valuable information, who had earned a golden opportunity through her own merit. And that, more than any scholarship or mentoring program, was the true treasure she took home that night. The certainty that she could make a difference, that her voice mattered, that her keen eyes and brave heart were precious gifts that could open doors she didn't even know existed. When they arrived home, the small apartment with peeling walls looked different. It hadn't physically changed, but now it was just a temporary stop, no longer the limit of their horizons. Soon, very soon, they would have a better place, a better life. "What are you thinking about, Bea?" Mrs. Rita asked as she prepared a simple dinner in the small kitchen. "I'm thinking about everything that happened today, Mum. It feels like a dream." "It's not a dream, my dear. It's real. It's the beginning of a new life for both of us. You know, Mum, Mr. Mark said that when I grow up I can work in company security. He said people with my talent are rare." Mrs. Rita smiled, serving the rice and beans and a little chicken. "And what do you think about that? Would you like to work in security when you grow up?" Bea thought for a moment, chewing slowly. "I think so. I like the feeling of discovering things, of stopping bad people from doing bad things. It was exciting." "You have time to decide, Bea. The important thing now is to study, to take advantage of this opportunity Dr. Charles is giving you. The rest will come naturally. Do you think one day I can be like Mrs. Helen, or even like Dr. Charles?" "I think you can be whatever you want, my dear. The sky's the limit." That night, Bea slept deeply on her mattress on the living room floor, but her dreams took her to places far beyond those four walls. She dreamed of meeting rooms, of computers, of mysteries to be solved. She dreamed of a future where there were no limits, where her skills were valued, where her voice was heard. And for the first time in her life, when she woke up the next morning, the dream did not dissipate with the daylight. On the contrary, it gained form and substance, transformed into a concrete possibility, into a path to be trodden. That day at the Brighton Tower had changed everything. And Bea could hardly wait to see what would come next. 15 years later, the morning sun illuminated the city of Brighton, reflecting in the mirrored windows of the imposing Brighton Tower. The city had changed over the years, growing and modernizing, but the building continued to be a landmark, a symbol of power and prestige in the heart of the financial center. On the 40th floor, in the spacious office overlooking the river, a 22-year-old woman observed the city stretching below. Beatrice Adams, now with a degree in computer science specializing in information security, was the youngest director of corporate security in the history of Maxwell Enterprises. Her hair, once a rebellious mess of curls, was now elegantly cut in a modern style that framed her face with strong, defined features. Her clothes were no longer those of a street girl, but rather those of a successful executive. A well-tailored suit, moderately heeled shoes, a state-of-the-art tablet in her hands. But her eyes remained the same. Lively, attentive, always observing, always catching what others didn't see. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said, without taking her eyes off the window. The door opened, revealing an older woman, elegant with graying hair pulled back in a discreet bun. Helen Sanders, now Vice President of Operations at Maxwell Enterprises, smiled upon seeing Bea. "Thinking about life?" Helen asked, approaching. Bea smiled, turning to face her. "Remembering, actually. Today marks exactly 15 years. Helen nodded, understanding immediately. 15 years since the day everything changed. The day a 7-year-old girl saved the company from industrial espionage. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Bea said, gesturing for Helen to sit down. "Other times it feels like a completely different life." "And in a way it was," Helen replied, settling into one of the armchairs in front of Bea's desk. "That day changed many things for many people." Bea agreed, sitting in her chair. Her desk, of modern and minimalist design, contrasted with the classic decor that Charles Maxwell had always preferred for executive offices. It was one of many personal touches Bea had implemented since taking over as Director of Corporate Security 3 months prior. "How's your mum?" Helen asked. "Great," Bea replied, smiling at the thought of Mrs. Rita. "She retired last month after almost 15 years as customer service supervisor. She's loving the free time, finally able to dedicate herself to the garden she always wanted to have." "And the new house? Have you moved in yet?" "Yes, 2 weeks ago. Their own house in Hove near the beach, as she always dreamed. You should see her face every time she wakes up and looks out the window. It's as if she can't believe it's real." Helen smiled, genuinely happy for them. "You both deserve it, Bea. Your mum worked hard all these years, and you are the greatest success story of our scholarship and mentoring program. The street girl who became a director." "I wasn't the only beneficiary of the program," Bea observed. "After me, hundreds of other young people came. Most are now at university or have already graduated. Some already work here at the company." "Yes, but you were the first, and you are still our brightest star." Bea felt her face flush with the compliment. Even after all these years, even with all the achievements and recognition, she still sometimes felt like that shy girl in the storage room, observing the adult world through the crack in the door. "Speaking of stars," Helen continued, "Dr. Charles wants to see you. That's why I came here, actually." "Has something happened?" Bea asked, immediately alert. Charles Maxwell, now almost 70, had reduced his participation in the company's daily management, though he continued as chairman of the board. "Nothing wrong," Helen reassured. "In fact, I think it's something very good. But he wants to tell you personally. He's waiting in his office." Bea nodded, standing up and adjusting her blazer. As she walked alongside Helen through the company corridors, she couldn't help but reflect on how things had changed. The same corridors she had once crept through, trying to eavesdrop on conversations, now saw her pass as a respected executive, someone whose opinion was valued, whose expertise was sought after. Charles Maxwell's office remained the same, spacious, elegant, with that perfect blend of tradition and modernity that reflected the personality of the man who had built an empire from scratch. Charles was sitting behind his desk, reading some documents. When Bea and Helen entered, he looked up and smiled, that warm smile that always made Bea feel welcome. "Ah, Bea." "Helen, come in," he said, getting up with some difficulty. The years had taken their toll, and his once merely graying hair was now completely white. But his eyes remained lively, perceptive, full of that sharp intelligence that had made him one of the most successful businessmen in the United Kingdom. "Dr. Charles," Bea greeted with genuine affection. "Helen said you wanted to see me." Yes. Please sit down." "You too, Helen." The two women sat in the armchairs in front of Charles's desk, who settled back into his chair. "Bea, do you know what day it is today?" he asked with an enigmatic smile. "Of course, Dr. Charles. 15 years since the incident with the Russians. The day that changed my life." "Exactly," Charles nodded. 15 years since a 7-year-old girl, who should have been quietly in the storage room, decided to investigate suspicious men and ended up unraveling an industrial espionage plot. B smiled, a little embarrassed. It wasn't as heroic as it sounds. I was bored and curious. That's all. Curiosity is what moves the world, B. That, and the courage to act when you discover something that isn't right. Charles picked up a folder from the desk and opened it, revealing some old photographs. Look at this, B leaned in to see. They were photos of her as a child, on the day of the incident. In one, she was in Charles's office, beside her mother, looking small and fragile, but with that determined gaze that had always characterized her. In another, she was with Mark, the former head of security, who was showing her the building's camera system. I didn't know these photos existed, B said. Surprised. I had them taken for the case documentation, but I ended up keeping them as a memento, Charles explained. Looking back, it's incredible to think how one day can completely change the course of many lives. Are you talking about the deep-sea technology? The one the Russians wanted to steal? Not just that, Charles replied. I'm talking about you, B. About that girl who became this extraordinary woman. The cleaner's daughter who is now a director at Maxwell Enterprises. B felt a lump in her throat. Even after so many years, the story still moved her. Not for the praise or the status, but for what it represented. Proof that determination, courage, and integrity could open doors that seemed permanently closed. The scholarship and mentoring program we created from your case has already benefited over 1,000 young people, Charles continued. Many of them, like you, came from disadvantaged communities, from families without resources, and like you, many of them are transforming their lives and the lives of their families. It's a wonderful program, Dr. Charles, B said sincerely. I'm honored to have been the inspiration for it. More than inspiration, B, you are its heart, its soul. That's why I called you here today. Charles looked at Helen, who nodded, encouraging him to continue. I am retiring, B, officially this time. B felt a pang in her chest. Although Charles had reduced his participation in the company in recent years, the idea of his complete retirement was something she had never seriously considered. He was Maxwell Enterprises, its founder, its driving force. And what happens to the scholarship program? Was the first question that came to her mind. Charles smiled as if he had expected exactly that reaction. That's why I'm here, B. I want you to take over as president of the Maxwell Foundation. B blinked, surprised. The Maxwell Foundation, created by Charles 10 years ago, was the entity responsible for the company's social programs, including the scholarship and mentoring program, as well as various other education and social inclusion projects. But what about the corporate security department? I just took over as director. You can keep both positions if you wish, Charles replied, or choose a successor for the security directorship and dedicate yourself entirely to the foundation. The decision is yours. The important thing is that the foundation needs someone who deeply understands its mission, who has personally experienced the transformation it seeks to provide. B remained silent for a moment, processing the proposal. The Maxwell Foundation was the social heart of the company, responsible for projects that changed lives, just as her life had been changed. Presiding over the foundation would mean being able to expand these programs, reach more young people, create more opportunities. It would be an honor, Dr. Charles, she finally said, but I don't know if I have enough experience to take on such a great responsibility. When you were 7, you didn't know if you could convince adults to believe what you'd heard. But you tried anyway, and you changed the course of history. Charles leaned forward, looking her in the eyes. Experience comes with practice, B. What matters is having your heart in the right place, a clear vision, and the determination to move forward. Helen, who had been observing the conversation with a discreet smile, added, Besides, you won't be alone. We'll be here to support you, to guide you when needed. The entire company is behind the foundation. B felt a wave of emotion. The trust that Charles and Helen placed in her was moving. More than that, it was a responsibility, a call to give back everything she had received. I accept, she said, her voice firm. I will find someone to take over the security directorship and dedicate myself to the foundation. It's the perfect way to honor everything I've received, to ensure others have the same opportunities I had. Charles smiled, visibly satisfied. Excellent. I knew I could count on you, B. The transition will be gradual over the next 3 months. Helen will help with all the details. Thank you for your trust. Dr. Charles, I promise I won't disappoint you. It never crossed my mind that you could disappoint me. B, not for a second. The meeting continued for some time, with the three discussing practical details of the transition, new projects for the foundation, ideas that B was already beginning to formulate. When they finally said goodbye, B returned to her office with her head buzzing with thoughts. President of the Maxwell Foundation. It was an enormous responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity to expand the positive impact on the lives of young people, just as hers had been impacted. She sat at her desk and looked again at the city stretching outside. Brighton with its bridges, its river, its contrasts. The city where she was born, where she grew up on the streets, where she learned to observe, to survive, to fight. The city that now saw her as a successful executive, a woman who had broken barriers, surpassed expectations, transformed adversity into opportunity. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was the building concierge. Dr. Beatrice, there's a young woman here at reception wanting to speak with you. She says it's about the Foundation's scholarship program. What's her name? B asked. Julia Sanders. She doesn't have an appointment but insists it's important. B smiled. Perhaps it was destiny on that very day. At that moment of transition. Send her up, please. A few minutes later, a timid knock sounded on her office door. Come in, B said. The door opened, revealing a girl of approximately 15 years old. Thin, with curly hair tied in a ponytail, simple but clean clothes. Her eyes, large and expressive, looked at B with a mixture of admiration and nervousness. Dr. Beatrice? The girl asked hesitantly. Yes, that's me. You must be Julia. Please come in. Have a seat. Julia entered, looking around with fascination. She sat in the armchair indicated by B, her hands restless in her lap. How can I help you, Julia? B asked with an encouraging smile. I heard about the Foundation's scholarship program. The girl began, gaining confidence as she spoke. My teacher gave me a leaflet. She said I have potential, that I should apply. And you want to apply? More than anything in the world, Julia replied, with an intensity that reminded B of herself years ago. I want to study, I want to have a profession, I want to help my family, but, B encouraged, applications closed last week. I couldn't apply in time because my brother got sick and I had to look after him. My mum works all day, you know. There was no one else. Julia lowered her eyes, disappointed. I came here hoping that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. B observed the girl carefully. She saw in her that mixture of determination and vulnerability she knew so well. The courage to knock on the door of an imposing building, to seek a director without an appointment, to expose her dream and her disappointment. Julia, do you know the story of how the scholarship program began? B asked softly. The girl looked up, curious. Not really. I just know it's been around for many years. 15 years to be exact, B said. And it started because of a girl, not much younger than you, who had the courage to do what she thought was right, even when no one believed her. B briefly told the story of that day at the Brighton Tower, omitting her own name, speaking as if the protagonist was someone else. And what happened to her? Julia asked, completely absorbed in the story. B smiled. She received a scholarship, the first of the program. She studied at good schools, went to university, and today? Julia insisted, leaning forward, eager for the outcome. Today she's sitting right in front of you, B completed with a smile. Julia's eyes widened, understanding illuminating her face. You? You're the girl from the story? Yes, Julia. I am the girl from the story. I was the first beneficiary of the scholarship program. And now, in an incredible coincidence, today I became the new president of the Maxwell Foundation. Julia seemed amazed, as if she were in front of a celebrity. This is incredible. You are an inspiration, Dr. Beatrice. Thank you, Julia. And as my first official act as president of the foundation, I am reopening applications for the scholarship program, specifically for you. The girl's face lit up with joy. Seriously? I can apply? Lying more than that. I want to hear your story. I want to know more about you, about your dreams, about what you expect from the future, because the program isn't just about studying at good schools, Julia. It's about discovering the potential that exists within you and transforming it into reality. The two talked for over an hour. Julia spoke about her family, about financial difficulties, about her love for studies, especially mathematics and sciences. She spoke about her dream of becoming a doctor, of helping people, of transforming her community. B listened attentively, recognizing in that young woman the same determination, the same drive that had propelled her throughout the years. When the conversation ended, she had no doubt Julia would be the next in a long line of young people whose lives would be transformed by the program. "I will personally follow your application process," B said, as she accompanied Julia to the door. "And regardless of the final selection result, I want you to know that you have already demonstrated an essential quality for success: initiative. Not many people would have the courage to come here as you did." Julia smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Dr. Beatrice. I promise I won't disappoint you." "I'm sure you won't. Julia, now go home, tell your family the good news, and be ready to start a new phase in your life." After Julia left, B returned to the window, observing the city once more. The cycle continued. 15 years ago, she was the shy and determined girl who had changed the course of her own history. Today, she was the woman who had the power to open doors for other Bs, other Julias, other young people full of potential just waiting for an opportunity. Her phone vibrated with a message. It was her mum. "Don't forget dinner tonight. We're celebrating 15 years since the day. I love you, my hero." B smiled, typing a quick reply. "I haven't forgotten, Mum, and I have exciting news to tell." The story continues. "I love you too." She put away her phone and gathered her things, preparing to leave. She had a meeting with Helen to discuss the details of her transition to the Foundation's presidency, and then dinner with her mum. As she closed her office door, she thought of the 7-year-old girl who had once crept through the corridors of that same building, overhearing conversations, unraveling mysteries, changing destinies. That girl could never have imagined where she would be 15 years later, and B could hardly imagine where she would be another 15 years from now. But one thing she was sure of: she would continue observing, listening, acting. She would continue making a difference one day at a time, one life at a time. Because that was the true lesson she had learned on that fateful day 15 years ago. Even the smallest people can change the course of history, if they have the courage to act when necessary. And that lesson, more than any title or position, was the true treasure she carried with her, a treasure she now had the privilege of sharing with others, so that they too could discover their own power of transformation. Dear listeners, we hope B's story has touched your hearts. This inspiring journey of a girl who transformed her destiny with courage and determination reminds us that we all have the power to change our lives and positively impact the world around us. To follow more exciting stories like this one, we have prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking to the left of the video. If this narrative resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which city you're watching from and what part of B's story touched your heart the most. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the extraordinary potential that exists within each of us. Until the next story, and remember, sometimes the greatest heroes are those who have the courage to observe what others don't see and act when no one else would.